The sound of forks and knives filled the fancy cafe until a soft voice stopped everything. "Excuse me, sir, may I have your leftovers?" Everyone turned, but billionaire Nathaniel Cross looked up slowly. A girl in a ripped dress knelt by his table, holding a tiny baby wrapped in a thin blanket. The child let out a quiet cry. Nathaniel froze. The baby's eyes, stormy gray, matched his own. His fork slipped from his hand and hit the plate with a loud clang. Something deep inside him stirred. He didn't know this woman, not really, but something about her felt familiar. She looked scared, her arms tight around the baby, as if she expected to be yelled at. But instead, Nathaniel stood and pulled out the chair beside him. "Sit," he said, his voice calm but firm. The whole cafe watched, stunned. Nathaniel couldn't stop staring. Those eyes, gray like a coming storm, matched his exactly. He remembered the test sitting locked in his office drawer. The moment he had brought the girl and her baby to his penthouse, he had ordered it. And now it was clear. The results showed 99.8% match. He was the baby's father. His business partner, Marcus, had warned him, "You're playing with fire, Nate. That's Rachel Carter's daughter. Helping her could destroy everything." But Nathaniel hadn't listened. He couldn't. The proof was right there, in those tiny gray eyes. Everything changed in that moment. His past, his plans, his pain. The name Carter brought back terrible memories. But this baby, she was innocent. And she was his. Nathaniel had always been cold and careful, but now he couldn't walk away. Not from her. Not from this truth. 5 years ago, everything in Nathaniel's life fell apart. His father had trusted Robert Carter like a brother, but one day Robert stole millions from their company and disappeared. That betrayal crushed their family. Nathaniel's father was so heartbroken, he ended his own life in his office. From that moment on, Nathaniel changed. He became hard, cold, and focused on one goal: revenge. He worked day and night to rebuild the empire his father had lost. He didn't trust anyone. He didn't love anyone. Feelings were a weakness he couldn't afford. That's why seeing Rachel Carter, Robert's daughter, was like a punch to the chest. She was the daughter of the man who ruined everything. But she wasn't just anyone anymore. She had his child. Nathaniel had always been cold and careful, but now he couldn't walk away. Not from her, not from this truth. 5 years ago, everything in Nathaniel's life fell apart. His father had trusted Robert Carter like a brother, but one day Robert stole millions from their company and disappeared. That betrayal crushed their family. Nathaniel's father was so heartbroken, he ended his own life in his office. From that moment on, Nathaniel changed. He became hard, cold, and focused on one goal: revenge. He worked day and night to rebuild the empire his father had lost. He didn't trust anyone. He didn't love anyone. Feelings were a weakness he couldn't afford. That's why seeing Rachel Carter, Robert's daughter, was like a punch to the chest. She was the daughter of the man who ruined everything. But she wasn't just anyone anymore. She had his child. Nathaniel had always been cold and careful, but now he couldn't walk away. Not from her, not from this truth. 5 years ago, everything in Nathaniel's life fell apart. His father had trusted Robert Carter like a brother, but one day Robert stole millions from their company and disappeared. That betrayal crushed their family. Nathaniel's father was so heartbroken, he ended his own life in his office. From that moment on, Nathaniel changed. He became hard, cold, and focused on one goal: revenge. He worked day and night to rebuild the empire his father had lost. He didn't trust anyone. He didn't love anyone. Feelings were a weakness he couldn't afford. That's why seeing Rachel Carter, Robert's daughter, was like a punch to the chest. She was the daughter of the man who ruined everything. But she wasn't just anyone anymore. She had his child. Nathaniel didn't know if he was ready to forgive, But for the first time in years, something inside him began to crack. That night, inside Nathaniel's massive penthouse, everything came out. Rachel sat on the couch, gently rocking her baby, who was now sleeping in her arms. Her voice shook as she spoke. "He sold me to pay off his debts," she said quietly. Nathaniel stood frozen. "My father, he gave me to one of his clients," she added. "I didn't remember what happened that night, not until my baby was born, with your eyes." Nathaniel's heart sank. That night years ago, he had been at a party, drunk, unaware of anything. Now he realized the truth. That night had led to this baby. He walked over to his desk, opened a drawer, and looked at the DNA test again. It confirmed everything. The girl in his penthouse, Rachel Carter, was the mother of his child. His daughter had been born from pain, but her presence was now changing everything. It all happened in an instant. One morning, Rachel woke up to find the crib empty, her baby gone. A note lay on the pillow beside it. Nathaniel read the words with a heavy heart. "You stole my fortune, Cross. Now I take what's yours." Rachel's screams still echoed in his ears. Nathaniel's chest tightened with fear and rage. Marcus came rushing in later. "We found them," he said, "Pier 17. But Robert's demands are insane. He wants your entire company in return." Nathaniel stared at the legal papers. Signing them would mean losing everything he had worked for. It would mean handing his life over to the man who destroyed his family. He felt torn in half. Then Rachel appeared, her hands trembling, but her eyes steady. She placed a small revolver in his palm. "It's your father's," she said softly, "but you'll have to choose, your revenge or us." Nathaniel looked down at the gun, realizing this moment would decide everything. Nathaniel stood at the edge of the dock, the ocean waves crashing below. In the distance, he saw Robert Carter holding baby Sophia over the water. Her tiny mouth was taped shut, her arms squirming helplessly. Nathaniel's heart nearly stopped. Behind him, Rachel held her breath, her hands still shaking from earlier. Robert's voice echoed through the salty air. "Sign the papers, or she's gone," he demanded, holding out a pen and the transfer forms. Giving up the company meant giving Robert everything: power, control, revenge. Nathaniel slowly walked forward, the papers in his hand. But then he stopped. His eyes locked with Robert's. "I don't deal with monsters," he said, and let the papers fall into the sea. A loud gunshot split the air. Robert's eyes widened before he collapsed to the ground. Rachel stood behind him, the revolver still smoking in her hands. Without thinking, Nathaniel lunged and caught Sophia just as she slipped from Robert's grasp. Her gray eyes met his, truly met them for the very first time. Nathaniel held Sophia tightly in his arms. Her little chest rose and fell, and her gray eyes blinked up at him, this time without fear. He gently pulled the tape from her mouth, whispering, "You're safe now." The sound of the waves and the wind faded. All he could hear was her soft breathing. Behind him, Rachel dropped the gun, her hands still trembling. Nathaniel turned to face her, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Two people broken by the same man, now standing together. Back at the penthouse, Nathaniel sat at his desk, staring at the contract Robert had tried to force him to sign. It was soaked and torn, never signed. His company was still his. But something was different. The man who had once cared only about power and revenge now cared about something else entirely. He wasn't the same Nathaniel Cross anymore. He had faced his past and chosen love over hate. 1 year later, Nathaniel stood on the balcony of his penthouse. The city lights sparkled below, but his eyes were on something much more important. Little Sophia, now healthy and full of energy, giggled as she tugged on his tie. Her stormy gray eyes sparkled with joy. Rachel stood beside him, leaning gently against his shoulder.
Her hand rested in his, warm and steady. "You kept your promise," she said softly. "I never had to beg again." Nathaniel smiled and kissed her forehead, then leaned down and kissed Sophia's cheek. "No," he said, his voice full of emotion. "But I did. I begged fate to give me a second chance, and somehow it listened." He had everything now, not just a company or a name, but a real family. The man who had once been broken by betrayal and loss had finally found peace. And in that quiet moment, with laughter and love around him, Nathaniel knew he would never go back to the man he used to be.